Hawatlo. My name is David Cobb. I use he, him pronouns. I'm coming at you from Jarajiji, a good place to stop and rest, also known now as Eureka, California. I am the coordinator of the Dishkama Community Land Trust, which is a department of the Wiyot tribe. So I have the honor and task of facilitating land back and working on regenerative economic development, restoration ecology, and helping to transform how economics are done here on traditional Wiyot ancestral territory. So it is my honor to bring this panel to you and to frame this panel. And I think it's one that's incredibly important because it's literally titled Decolonizing Restoration. And, I remember up until very recently, I would have thought and did think that the restoration work that groups like CalTrout were doing were at the very cutting edge of how to properly handle rivers and forests and streams. And I want to be clear, the work that CalTrout is doing is phenomenal. It's profound, it's important, it needs to be done. Pause. And we and they have to take it deeper. And that's the notion of decolonizing, because what look, I'm a lawyer by training, right? And what I realize now is that conservation easements, as important as they are still steeped and rooted within the colonial framework of property rights itself. Because remember, in the Western concept of property rights, they are, first of all, they're rights. And if you have property rights, you have the right to exclude, you have the right to extract, you have the right to exploit. Everything in the Western concept around property are around rights. And it's almost impossible in the Western legal context to even think about the rights of nature. And I'm going to push myself and us to say, and let's get beyond even that and recognize a truly decolonized worldview would be not even based on rights, but reciprocal relationships. And I think that is why I'm so excited to be kicking it off and turning it over to Ali Matters-Knight and Mel Figueroa, who are with, a number of different organizations, but they're going to actually be talking to us about Chico TEK, Traditional Ecological Knowledge, what they're actually doing. And then we're going to bring in CalTrout, and I'll introduce the three interlocutors, if you will, of CalTrout, and then we'll get into a learning moment together. So without further ado, I'm going to bring in Ali Matters-Knight and Melissa Figueroa. Take it away.
Hey, Tanani. I'm coming at you from occupied Mechoopda territory here in California. That's also called Chico, California.
And I'm Mel Figueroa. I work with Ali. I'm not indigenous to Mechoopda territory, but I am trying to be a good guest by working with Ali on this program.
So I'll introduce myself. My title, and for this presentation, I'm the Master Traditional Ecological Practitioner for the Mechoopda tribe here. Our ancestral territory recently was on national news in what is called a campfire. And so we learned a lot from that fire, but there's a lot that was learned for thousands of years prior to colonial contact here. And I'd like to share with you, during this presentation, some insight on traditional ecological knowledge from one of the masters.
So first, what is traditional ecological knowledge? Again, it's a term that's been thrown around a lot, but we are using it in a very particular way. So just to, I'm going to share the slide now. So TEK, the word traditional kind of means like in the past, but it's not really in the past because tribal people are still living today. And the questions that Indigenous science addressed are more relevant than ever. So you want to explain the system?
Well, yeah, so traditional ecological knowledge, I'll just tell you really quick, the term I got from Haskell University in 2009, when I was trying to talk about workforce development and how tribes can work on land. And they're like, doing what? And then it came down to, dang, traditional ecological knowledge. There's the buzzwords that I needed to get through the doors. And so it's a science, it's traditional science, but it's really the indigenous science, it's place-based science that's on the observation of the indigenous folks for thousands of years. So it's a particular type of science that is pretty much what you would call pre-colonial, all right? But it's also post-colonial, during colonial, it's all the colonial, it's everything. But in this text, we say traditional ecological knowledge as we're referring to the indigenous science at a place-based, so much indigenous territory. Conservation and inhabited landscapes. So we're going to talk about what wild lands mean.
Yeah, and so when you consider colonial history and you consider genocide and removal from the land of the stewards that practice this place-based indigenous science, that has a lot of implications for what we call conservation today. Most times conservation is like, don't touch the forest, like, hands off, let nature do its thing. Well, there's no such word as wild in many indigenous languages. Part of the thing is that part of the ways that we have to revolutionize conservation to actually, do justice to indigenous peoples is to recognize that science itself must also take into account the fact that there is active habitation and management, or not tending and stewardship, that people consider themselves part of the ecosystem and not separate from it.
So let's just talk about California right now in a particular colonial state, as it's called now, California. 1851 was the beginning. Now you can leave it here on this. So, but let's look at the real geographic history. So the Sierra Mountains and all of the, what we call the Sutter Buttes and this Central Valley and this area, these basins, 40 million years old. Pretty young for the planet, for all the tectonics and all that other going on. You're looking at $40 million. It's pretty young. California is young. And so California still has earthquakes. California still has volcanoes. California has fire, but has had fire for thousands of years and also has floods. And so fires is one of the only thing that happens that seems to be able to be mitigatable. And so you can, I don't know if that's a word, but you can mitigate, right? And so that is a very interesting concept when you're looking at tribes in the area of the Sierra Nevada, because there's also plants like the blue oak that are just unique to this. Nowhere else on the planet are there blue oaks, but right here. Why? Because it's a young state and it grew, it adapted to this area. That's a place-based knowledge. You're not going to know about blue oaks if you're from Tennessee because you've never seen one. You don't know why it does what it does. It started here 40 million years ago with this relationship with this other one. It might be less than 40 million, but we have all this oak population, the gray pines, this particular plants that come into this area are also fire adapted, flood. Some of them are flood adapted, which I call, can tolerate a waterboarding or two. They can handle it. They're not going to die. They're not going to totally get decimated. And this is how we've learned that it's become adapted to the climate. Okay, this is climate adaptation. And so what this kind of really puts you into understanding is that if natives have been here for 21,000 years here in Northern California during all these different events for climate change, whether it was a volcano going off, because that'll cause climate change, even somewhere on the other part of the planet. This one we're particularly going through is man-made. We understand that, but it's not the first time. And so the resilience of each geographical situation, which we are here on this place right here on this, the Mediterranean subzone, the subterranean area, it's very particular. These plants are unique. So when they're adapted to this environment, they behave in a certain way. They behave in a way with good fire and bad fire. They behave in a different way for flood, like a little bit of water or too much water. and then they behave a different way with human interaction.
Right. So, as Ali said, right, like climate change is not unique to California, but here are basically a list of the disasters that hit California and that we will expect in the future with climate change. So we've already seen extreme wildfires, these wildfire seasons that are now just totally devastating and almost all year, extreme high temperatures, extreme drought, and extreme flooding. And I will note that the two pictures on this slide, the bottom two, are both of the same place. So there's Lake Oroville in a drought, and then there's Lake Oroville in a wet year in 2017, where the spillway basically broke and the dam was this close to flooding and affecting 180,000 people.
So I talked about mitigation or mitigatable.
Yeah.
That's my new word.
Mitigatable.
Mitigatable. Knowledge of how to predict a major event, know what the outcomes are going to be, pretty much. All right. And then you're trying to minimize the damage, right? And you're also going to be talking about what is your recovery time and what are your strategy and objectives for recovery. Is your recovery time, you're like, I need to build a hospital first and foremost to get everybody built, and I need to build houses just the way they were before they went down? Or is your like, you know, those are different types of objectives for recovery? Or you're talking about revegetation with native plants, you know, changing a lot of your scope of work and workforce. So you can also see about the current colonial approach for infrastructure for emergency is to, you know, protect the property, right?
Not necessarily the people.
Yeah, humans. Yeah,
Maybe.
and then to
Maybe.
optimize their, basically to get their COC, their chain of command, down to an art, science, perfect. You know, we got the COC, we got all these orders of operations and all these leagues of men and all women, all in a chain of command that all are strategizing to do this, very military style. So to use the military tactics and styles for which we would call a colonial approach, military and colonial matching, right? If they were to go together and, you know, you're using a military response to a natural disaster all the way through, this is going to happen over again and over again in climate change. So now we need to think about, is this tactic a plan of attack and containment of fire, flood, damage? Is it really going to make sense? So let's look at some examples.
Right. So, I mean, because this is Decolonizing Economics Summit. So not many people actually understand that there is an economy of disaster that already exists. It's called disaster capitalism, right? And so this, you know, green jobs, green economy, in this paradigm, right? It is about military style tactics. It's about a plan of attack. It's about heavy equipment. Ooh, lots of capital intensive heavy equipment like bulldozers to, like, you know, blaze swaths 1 mile wide through the forest as a fire break. Let's prop up the dying timber industry by giving them lots of contracts for cleanup and recovery. Let's, you know, again, as Ali said, like, let's focus on making the land valuable so that private equity can go in and rebuild houses exactly as they were before the fire, right? And of course, the mitigation is also focused on hoarding resources. Okay, we got a drought, so, you know, of course, all of the farmers are going to lobby to say we can hoard water in our property. Isn't that, you know, isn't that convenient so that now we can own the water, right?
Yeah, so it's, you know, in a lot of ways, it is disaster capitalism, you know, with putting a little stank on it by adding to the fact that it's contractable work from outside independent agencies. So if you're in a disaster area and you live on a piece of property and you're like, this is my property I've had for years, and that's my house, and that's my garage, and this is mine, and I paid for it. I had a relationship with the bank for a long time. It's mine. As soon as it's a national disaster is declared, a federal natural disaster is declared where your property is, that is eminent domain at the moment. So just remember, that a lot of these property rights before disaster, before mitigation, they're all in place. So I could, working down, a piece of property and I'm like, oh, we got all these invasive out, all natives, really good. Oops, let's get permission from this landowner to fix that. And he says, no, that's my property. If I want it full of piss firs and conifers that don't belong here, that's my prerogative. And if I want the timber industry to lease it out to them, then that's my prerogative because I'm making money on it. It's my personal property. But as soon as there's a national fire and there's a wildfire, it's on fire, whose property is it? It's now federal. It's their problem. So just always remember that.
Yep.
So a TEK approach. So this is disaster mitigation from, indigenized eyes, right? So how would an Indian do it, right? Okay, let's talk about it. We're not from India, no. But we're still called Indians in California, so I'll use that slang if you don't mind. But place-based adaptation, right? So let's go back to the fact that this place I'm looking at my own hometown, my own territory. I know that there's trade routes, and I know those trade routes are within the watershed. So they're not too hard to find. It's not like I'm gonna like, oh my God, I gotta go find that trail. No, they're usually trails, but they're all started from waterways. So that's a little easier. We know what the watershed is, a creek, a river, blah, blah, blah. Wow, trading routes. So then we're going to go look at the strategic large-scale management about a specific watershed ecosystem within these trading routes that will get you to safety between fire and flood, earthquake. So let's give you some tips real quick. So fire likes to go up and fire likes to go out. So if a big wildfire is, you got to get away from it as much as possible, and that you don't want to drive. That song, Against the Wind. Yeah, that's a good song. Drive against the wind. Don't go in.
Don't go into it.
You're taking the fire with you.
Yeah.
So the other one is earthquakes. If you're in a basin, when you're on the outside on a rock or a mountain, an earthquake happens, you don't feel it as much as if you're in a basin or a valley. So if you're predicting there's a lot of earthquakes, a lot of clutter, get out of valley. There's one tip.
Yep.
Second, if you have a flood, this is really going to get you. Go to higher ground. So, but really know your watershed and know where you're at. If you don't know you're in a floodplain, there's I'm gonna give you an example. There's about 1 million people sitting in a very dangerous floodplain in Sacramento right now. And if it starts flooding, it's going to go 2 feet every 20 minutes. They won't drive. So everybody will get in their cars and get stuck in a traffic jam, and they're going to start floating around. I'm telling you. So strategic large-scale land management for predictable outcomes. I just told you a predictable outcome, right? Traffic jam, people floating around. It happened with the Feather River right here at the Oroville Dam. People just realized that they would be stuck. Everyone knew they were going to die in a flood because there wasn't any kind of exit route that people could do. People were literally stuck in traffic jams. Even by the time they got it all cleared out, it was like they thought it was a miracle that they didn't die. And so we really have to look at these outcomes, the 200-year flood, the fires. We have to look at how we're going to mitigate that.
And how it bounces back.
So if we want to get an ecosystem resilient setup, so this is the analogy I use, and I don't know if anybody can relate to it or even understand it, but I'll try. There's MMA fighters, right? Can you imagine getting an MMA fighter where the trainer is training the guy to avoid every punch, to totally try to do full suppression, just don't move, just total pinning, no hitting, and
call for help.
And then, totally let's not get like ever during training get slapped once or twice or get any kind of bruising going on. No cartilage built up, nothing. Because that's basically how we set up California. Mm-hmm. To build up resilience, you've got to hit it a couple times. You got to practice. You got to get it ready. You got to learn to take some hits. You won't stand in there and stay resilient if your whole training is to avoid getting hit. You've got to learn to take hits. And so this is just how climate adaptation to me is adapting, right? It's learning to take hits. How is it going to respond to a flood? How is it going to respond to a fire? And how is the fire going to behave, and how is the water going to behave? What is the forensics that I am going to be looking at it, and how can I go back to that other one,
Replicate that,
minimize
yeah.
damage, human life, and kind of maximize the bounce back that we can have. So there we
And
go.
so the economy that's associated with a TEK approach, as opposed to the disaster capitalism that we described to you earlier, is much more of a social economy. So if there's trade routes, there's got to be people and communities that trade with each other. If there are communities that are situated in a place, they are going to want to maximize, right, the resilience of that place by teaching everybody in the community how to do it, right?
So that goes into workforce development and community land management regimes. So give you some big numbers, and then you can kind of wrap your mind around this idea. In California, we have 33 million of acres of forestry. 19 million of that forest is federal land. So, but just think of that 33 million, because when you think about it, Newsom got on the news, or got like a couple of, I don't know how many months ago he was on there, and he was very proud of himself. Here in California, the governor is like, we are going to take care of 1 million acres of forestry this year. Yeah, there's 33. So that's like nothing. It's a drop in the bucket. And so that the reason why that, and I'm going to tell you this, is because California is one of the biggest states that has used land management and its work as a form of punishment, slave labor out of the military industrial complex. And so people think that working on the land is punishment, community service, because you did something naughty. But the fact is it's one of the things that really needs to be, promoted as one of the highest paying jobs in California. Should be large scale, labor intensive, based on the knowledge of weather cycles that are trained from place-based science of indigenous communities, so that they have predictable outcomes during natural disasters and climate change, and have an idea of the keystone species in that area that they can survive on. This is ecosystem management. This is humans being good humans on the land. This is learning how to do fire, understanding how the salmon cycles run, so that you can have, the right kind of productivity. Because I'm going to tell you, might not use the housing and basketry right now, or the medicines that indigenous science use, but you are using it. You think that you're not using it, but you are using it. The science in basketry is MIT science, and some of it is so spectacular, based on the coil, and these coil baskets that are made are just amazing with the designs. Those designs are math. Have you ever attempted to try to do that? You'll realize that you have to keep track of splitting numbers and fractions so that you can get the right design, and doing it over and over again. Think about it. That is traditional ecological knowledge. That is indigenous science. And so this, this never went away, because it'll always be here. It's us humans that have the sketchy thing going on.
All right. So how does this work in, how are we fitting this in to the, conventional model of conservation today? Because a lot of people think, oh, it's a tribe, so they're just going to be concerned with their reservation, or whatever land was like, they were allowed to be on by a colonial government. But that's actually not how it works in federal law. Tribal jurisdiction for cultural resources, and as we said, cultural resources are not just the bones and stones of the past, but they are living cultural resources, like the keystone plants, like the basketry material, like all of these, relationships that indigenous peoples have cultivated with plants. So that jurisdiction for cultural resources is not just tribal lands and trusts. It is the whole ancestral territory, which in California, all of California is unceded tribal territory. And so the jurisdiction actually legally applies for every piece of land in California. Federally recognized tribes are also federal agencies within local jurisdictions. So like what you were saying, with the federal things. And so that way, federally recognized tribes can be a bridge between federal, state, and private land management. And so this is how we have been able to get contracts. You want to explain this, Bosta?
Let's go to the next slide.
Okay. All right. So
traditional ecological knowledge is a certifiable program at the tribe, as we made a program out of it. And this was a way, because I went to like Pioneers and was listening to State of California workforce panels, and I can't remember all the Google stuff that I look up all the time when I'm trying to research this, and some of it's not really relevant, but what I got my mind around is that the California workforce is kind of seized up. It's like a seized engine a little bit. A lot of the most important jobs that we make there is, certifying for haircuts, plumbing, mechanic, you name it. But they cost money. The state makes a profit off of them. But, based on the labor and the cost to be that and get the education, it's starting to get a really tight fit, even for college graduates that have student debt. It's the bang for the buck is starting to get real squeaky, right? For all these jobs, almost every job. You make 100,000 a year, like, right? Really, I'm making 50,000 a year because I'm so in debt. It's really not even sitting there. So I was like, well, why don't we create a whole new certification with a debt-free education? And like in a free world, let's just say it was my planet, I was making the rules, and I'm like, let's make up some free, education certifications from the tribe based on place-based, and I'll certify you on keystone species, riparian, meadow, woodland. We'll get at it, and just in case I don't have it, I'll get some biologists and some other scientists to sign on and teach little, ad hocs of the certification just to cover our bases, and we'll see if we can do workforce development and restoration with this. And it works. So this brings us into the stewardship contracting. So I told you that there's 33 million acres of federal forest in California, but 19 million of those are federal, right? So I want federal stewardship contracting. That's what tribes get into. That's what we mess with. We're federal agents, you're federal agents, talk to my federal agents, and we get contracting. It's called 638 contracting, sole source contracting. And so it's a tough one right now. It's under the, U.S. Farm Bill, 2018 Farm Bill. There's a bunch of tribal, stewardship contracting under these provisions there. And so what this kind of does is build up this possibility once we're building these partnerships. We have an outcome, we have a goal, right? What's that light at the end of the tunnel? Those are long-term stewardship contracting. That's long-term acreage. You know what I mean? That's 20 years. So they're not going to give you a 17-acre lot for 20 years. Heck no. They're going to give you a lot, maybe 300 acres, maybe more, right? Of restoration for the next 20 years. You got to plan and manage it. And then one of the things that you have to do with the stewardship contracting when you're a tribe or a tribal entity and you're getting into this agreement, you're trying to say, okay, for this 26, I want to scope the work. I don't want you to tell me what to do. You don't even know what to do. You don't even know what a healthy forest is. I know what a healthy forest is. You don't know. So let me do it. Let me scope the work. So that's another thing that happens in these forest stewardship contracting is scope of work. And the third thing that happens with this is deliverables, right? Goods for services. They change up. I don't have a logging machine. I'm not going to sit there. I don't know how to take this tree and turn it into a roll of toilet paper. But if I did, I'd call it treaty paper. Like TP, but now we're going to say a treaty paper. Yeah. But we don't have those kind of products coming out of the forest floor from a tribal perspective. What I'm having is coming up on the next slides. I'll show you.
Let me go. There we go.
We have the seed program, right? Free capital sitting around. Let me show you real quick.
So when we talk about goods for services, so just to explain, goods for services was originally made up by the timber industry to say we will manage, i.e., or they use the language of restoration to actually just do more timber. and to extract more timber. So now we're using that same mechanism, but for something that actually does restore the ecosystem, which is
So this is a bunch of seeds, right? So today's little capture is, these are all poppy seeds that are ready to come off some of the poppies. The first poppies that bloom, they're getting old. The second round happened. Back here, we have all the lupin, tons and tons of lupin. This lupin is dry and I'm getting all the seeds out of here. You know how much these are worth? A lot. And guess what? Monsanto doesn't own them. There's no patent on these seeds. They're native. They're
actually federally protected.
They're
because
federally
they're
protected.
Cultural resources of the tribe.
yeah, under the TIPO office, you know, under what I work under. And this is why a master TEK practitioner is really important, because I can play the role in kind of talking about the importance of this free capital laying around at the parks, the seeds. And so a lot of times, you know, this free seed sitting around, you store it, right? You can't store it, you store it in your house. I have 5 kids and a squirrel. I've got a lot of stuff going on here. So we have programs, start working with programs and people that have spaces in their garages and extra refrigerators, and, you know, all pitch in for perlite at some point, and then we all get our seeds. We start seed banking all this together. Then for the last 17 years, I've been doing sometimes half court press, sometimes full court press on the Mendocino tree farm that's located here in Chico, which is just basically a genetic farm that was built in the 1910, and it was an earmark. So they're starting to decommission and pretty much shut down some of the program there, but they're decommissioning and not using buildings. So I don't know if any of you remember Alcatraz and what happened and what that is about. But when there's surplus federal property, it needs to go through the tribe in that territory, whether they want it or not. Yes or nays.
Right of first refusal.
But a lot of times they don't tell you, right? So there's a decommissioned, you know, truck in the middle of a, you know, armory on federal land in your tribal territory. 9 times out of 10, those white men are not going to contact the tribe for the right of first refusal. They
Right.
don't. Or women. They don't. That is a colonial set. They don't do it. But you can go in there if you know it's there and say, hey, I've been looking at that truck sitting there. You're not using it. The tribe is going to, you can send your tribal council and just knock on the door and say, hey, I want that extra federal surplus property you have there. And I got a flat no for years until I got a tribal liaison from the federal forest that said, oh yeah, it's on the books. I was like, I know, I've been saying. And so now it's going down. So the first 638 contract, we got our first building on federal land because we did. Now I fought the law and the law helped me win. But this was a situation where seed banking kind of bloomed into this federal contracting on the Mendocino farm, that 638. Remember I was talking about that 20-year stewardship contract? It's steps. One thing leads to another, but it's that federal status of the tribe and a lot of these federal lands and these federal things that really have like put me in my own unique lane.
Yeah.
Because a lot of mom and pop shops and a lot of these contractors that are local really only can deal with states.
Right. And there's a big need for this because of all the wildfires that have burned over 4 million acres in the last year alone. And so there's a lot of land that needs seeds. There's a lot of stuff. And the Forest Service has actually run out of commercial sources for native seeds. Like even the people who go into our restoration areas and they basically take the seeds and sell them at a markup, they've even run out of that. So this is where a new kind of economy, a decolonized economy, can be done with restoration using seeds as the capital for these restoration projects. But not only is it seeds, it's skills, right? So our crew, right, has not only TEK certifications from ALI, but also all of the state required certification. So they've gone through the logging stuff, the Sawyer and the heavy equipment. They've gone through fire. We are all red carded to be wildland firefighters so that we can do prescribed burns. We're also training our crew on how to do environmental planning, how to make a restoration plan, how to use GIS, how, you know, the terms and the language that is used in watershed management. So all of our crew is a really well-rounded group of people so that when they put their hands on the land, they know what they are doing every step of the way. And that has gotten it to where our crew starts now at $33 an hour for restoration, when they were working for $14, $15 an hour before in just backbreaking forestry work, right?
Yeah, and you got to have a mean Native woman like me also as going in for contract negotiations, because that helps.
Yeah. And the last thing we just wanted to look at was cultural burning. So if you want to talk about that.
Cultural burning, here we go. This is targeting a specific species of deer, and this is deer grass. So we have one, this field of deer grass, such as pretty large. They were more mature. They were, you know, 4 feet, 3-4 feet tall. You know, they'd been trimmed. We'd been gathering seeds from them for years, but they hadn't been burned. And so deer grass respond to burning the most and the best. And it is the, it's the expert way to tend to the deer grass, especially since we're also plan on using it for basketry, for basket materials, for weaving. So in order to do that, to get the perfect straight ones with the right kind of consistency we need fire. So you're seeing here tribal crews out there doing traditional cultural burn. We're not in Nomex outfits. You'll see in one picture there might be some Nomex from Trex around in their Nomex, but they're basically just there as token white folks. No, sorry. No, they're there as no, they were there to make us look like we were official Cal Fire, but they were really part of our training when we went through our red card training, and we wanted to share an experience from the other side for them to come see a cultural burn. And we had children there. I think there's dogs running around. It's really a lot different and casual. It's a safer feel. And so we did this in the middle of the city, which I was told that I would never be able to do. And I kept being told that of about 2 weeks up until we did it, because I don't think they understood how I been working the policy for fuels management in a programmatic EIR, problematic. It's both,
Yeah.
but it was good. It was programmatic EIR that covered fuels management for a lot of parks and everything. So sneaky, you can get a lot of stuff in when you throw it all together in one big gumbo thing. And you know, basically, I hate to say this, but you can sometimes, and this is true for politicians, you can baffle politicians with bullshit when it comes to some of these programs, these overwhelming them with programs. And so one of the things we were able to do was get this cultural burning and kind of slid in. And it's a tactic. If you don't know about it, try it, see what it looks like, but it worked on this case.
Yeah, and we should emphasize that this is the first cultural burn within the city of Chico in 150 years. This was outlawed, an outlawed practice. And then even when it was, you know, no longer outlawed in 1978, there were still tons and tons of barriers. It's only been this year that California legislation has been passed that actually allows for tribal practitioners to do cultural burns in the way that it's needed. And so we're looking forward to, you know, participating more in that and seeing how it's going. Okay, that's it for us.
Thank you so much, Ali and Mel. I've seen this presentation before, and I am always so inspired and genuinely awed at what you're doing. It's now my great pleasure to introduce the folks from CalTrout. I want to just take a moment to say that I've gotten to know these three women through the work that we've been doing together here in Wiyot ancestral territory. And I am just so grateful for the learning journey that I'm on with the three of them. I'm going to introduce Gaby. Gaby is going to introduce CalTrout, the organization, and then they're just going to each do a go round on how they personally have entered in to this learning journey and work. And then we're going to ask them to basically ask Ali and Mel a couple of questions. So that's the format. And I'm going to turn it over now to Gaby Ruff. Gaby?
Hi, thank you. Thank you, and me too. Second time I've seen this presentation, and it's even more inspiring than the first. Thank you very much. Yeah. So California Trout. CalTrout turned 50 this year. It's which makes it kind of an established environmental organization. Been pretty traditional in the approaches that we've taken to restoration over the years, and pretty successful. We've done some good work, some big work, but in the last, say, 3 years, I think the organization has really changed. I think we've been on a reflective journey. We've sort of got introduced to DIJ, you know, diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice, the trainings, the process. We've had some hard times, some soul searching, and there've been some changes. There've been some changes in our work that I think are pretty exciting. And one of them is the work we've been doing with David and Michelle Vassell from the Wiyot tribe. And personally, that's, before I get into personal, let me just tell you the structure of CalTrout. 7 offices across California and a central office in San Francisco. And some of the tenets that Ali mentioned, Ali and Mel, the things like place-based restoration, being in community, the thing about looking at a watershed scale, the idea that especially in the face of climate change, you have to manage important landscapes actively. All of those ring true for us. The other steps that we're still learning to take is kind of, I guess, what we have to contribute, those stepping stones to get from traditional conservation organization to the kind of work that Ali and Mel are talking about. So I can just tell you very quickly for myself. I was thinking, what do I have to offer to all of you on this call? And I think it's mainly how to stand as a white person in relationship to this work. And my history, so I grew up in the anti-apartheid activist community. So all the fight for social justice against the capitalist regime is very familiar to me, as is the white guilt of being a colonizer. And I think possibly the thing that's changed the most for me as I've tried to bring myself wholeheartedly to this effort, to this struggle, is how to get beyond that guilt. And actually, David has been really helpful in that. How to understand the trauma, how to understand my responsibility for putting things right, for wanting to put things right, but also understanding my own disconnection from the land and how hard it is for me to live that way and to grow it again and to build that relationship and to move away from oppositionality that I think I came from, that sort of like, they're so bad, into, you know, into a calling in, into a sense of inclusivity, into more of a, I think someone says calling in rather than calling out. And then perhaps one of my skills as a white person who's been in this work for a while is how to get money, how to use government grant opportunities to actually land the dollars to make the change on the ground. And there's a lot you can do with that. You can replicate good models across regions. You can fund partners doing important work. You can help partners get their own funding to do their own important work. So yeah, that's what I have to offer. And I'm going to, can I pass it on, David? Can I pass it over to Mary?
Please do.
Mary.
Hi there. I think, Lazaro, were you going to go next and then I was going to follow? Are you willing to go now? Okay, thanks.
Okay, thanks, Mary. Hi, everyone. My name is Lasada. I'm a grants associate at CalTrout and I've been here for over 2 years. I'm calling from Ohlone Ramaytush Muwekma land, also known as San Francisco. Yeah, I'm just really grateful to be sharing this space with you all. I think the main takeaway I've had from my work at CalTrout and our work with David and Michelle and our conversations with Ali and Mel is just how grateful I am for the opportunity to sit here and kind of dream and imagine what this work can look like if it was different, what we can add to it, almost like what we can manifest together. And I think it's going to be related to some of the questions I have for Ali and Mel, but just the opportunity to like take a step back from our usual day-to-day and the usual way of conservation work we're doing, and yeah, see what we can add on to it. I think the reason I do feel this pull is also just, you know, part of like my family history. I have been in the Bay Area for 10 plus years, but I'm originally from Phoenix, Arizona, and that's where all my family's from. Yeah, parents are from Mexico and the Navajo Nation, and just bringing that family history with me. And so thinking about the land that I now live on and want to care for is really important. Yeah, and so just thinking about how we can, like Gaby was saying, replicate that model within CalTrout and within the grant proposals we're working on, and how to be a better partner with organizations like Ali and Mel and the work they're doing there. So with that, I'll pass it on to Mary.
Thanks, Lasara and Gaby. So my name is Mary Burke, and I would be calling in from Wiyot ancestral territory, but then I realized I'm not at home. I'm down in Santa Cruz, so I believe I am in Ohlone, unceded ancestral territory. And I'm at a conference called Salmonid Restoration Federation. And it's a beautiful and strange experience to be at two conferences at once. But the wonderful thing in this moment is some of the resonance that I'm hearing in the conversations that are happening. So my personal journey, I just want to sort of give you the flow, because I feel like it is also the flow that we're experiencing within the workplace, right? Is this like unraveling and digging deeper. So about 17 years ago, I was young and, you know, running around in the woods, studying birds, loving being immersed in nature. It's my happy place. And then I started to wake up. You know, I had the privilege of being, you know, asleep to a lot of things, but I started to wake up and realize that people were making decisions in our world there were these large bird die-offs. So that then became my path. Who makes these decisions? How and why? And I found myself up at Humboldt State University, now Cal Poly Humboldt, and I enrolled in a program called International Development Technology, which no longer exists, but I wish it did, because I think it would handle, and well, they're developing many new programs right now, but it was about sustainable and appropriate technology, but it was also about politics and economics. So I then added that piece to my biological background, and then I settled in a place that was near and dear to my heart in the town of McKinleyville, that's now known as McKinleyville. And so I really became rooted in my community, which took me into politics. And then I was, hey, here's another way of really understanding who and how decisions get made, which is particularly interesting in an unincorporated community as well. But there's a lot of opportunity there too. So I then got the job with California Trout right about then. And I just devoted myself to understanding how we do this work called restoration, which I just want to say it's really recovering processes. That's how you constantly have to come back to. We're not restoring to something that was. We're attempting to recover processes, and we have to remind ourselves that all the time. And in that place of actually with going back to the politics within my community and in the role of being an elected official, I became one of the founding members of an anti-racist group, the McKinleyville Alliance for Racial Equity. That then was another point of growth and really starting to understand, you know, who and how these decisions are made, and a massive shift in my awareness, and one that now I incorporate the growth that happened in that sphere everywhere. And so that sphere then came, you know, to CalTrout, and I pushed us as an organization to really dig in, and the organization adopted, yes, we want to understand, like Gaby said, diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. So we've been, you know, on our own learning journey, each one of us individually and organizationally wide. But it wasn't until I joined Cooperation Humboldt that I really could start to put together the systems of oppression with the conservation work. And all of a sudden the light bulbs are starting to go off. And through that, it has led us to this conversation through David and Michelle with the Wiyot tribe here to be with you. And so that journey, I have a great mentor, Dr. Robert Gearhart, who I asked him once, how did you get where you are? And because, you know, I was really admiring his position and his knowledge. And he said, you know, as you're going through life, you're just taking what's in front of you, and you're going with what you're really interested in. But when you turn around and look back, there's a straight line connecting them all together. So it's been an amazing journey. And I'll end with two things. One is that just today in the conference, there's a session on collaboration, and there's a construction contracting firm who is bringing forth an idea of training the crew, the construction crew, in essentially some of the same things that you, Ali, and Mel are talking about, in teaching them what they're doing and why, and, you know, all the regulations that apply, so that the workforce itself goes home at night not talking about how hard it was to deal with the regulator, or, you know, what happened with the, you know, the mud and the mess of restoration, but that they're excited to know that what they're contributing to is the bigger picture of recovery. And the second piece was just to bring in that one of the projects that I have the honor of stewarding is on the Badawat River, the Mad River, as is typically known up in Humboldt County there in Wiyot territory. And in that project, deepening the organization and my relationship with the Wiyot tribe through interpretive signage and storytelling, and in the revegetation planting plan that we're putting forth, having consulted on the types of plants, and then when we go to plant them, what I hope we lead towards is the consultation on where is going to be the best place to plant these plants that will then support the future stewardship and partnership with the Wiyot tribe. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So as promised, I'm now going to bring into spotlight the folks from CalTrout, along with Ali and Mel, and invite a conversation that the rest of us will listen to as a learning journey.
Can I start?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, great. So here we are. We've got the infrastructure bill with a huge amount of, well, really billions of dollars to spend on natural resources. And 15% of that is earmarked for tribes. And we've got Deb Halland looking over all of the interior, and we've got Wade Crowfoot looking over California's interior, and it feels like this amazing opportunity to get some really different work done. I wondered if you could talk about your contracting experience that you have going on with the Forest Service, and then just generally, how do we get this opportunity realized on the ground? How do, some tribes have got very sophisticated natural resource departments and others have less. How do we make hay while the sun is shining?
I'm a good person to ask, because not only did I have the resistance coming from, I have a majority, even though Chico is slightly on the liberal side, it's 80% white folks here, and very conservative, city council, conservative, board of supervisors, and my tribal council, has been a tough, they've been a tough sell buy-in on this program. Very, very careful about it. Mostly it's under, a smaller group of a board that's, a small group of tribal citizens who are just very skeptical that this is actually possible or doable. And all you need is a couple of skeptics to make the resistance, felt. And so what I had to start do is convincing them that, all this infrastructure money, all this has to be built on partnership, that the tribe just can't go in alone and say, we have it, because we know that we don't have the population we don't have that. You know what I mean? There's not even tribal members, gosh, in the area, that we can get. We'd have to pull everybody from their jobs, and it would just be it'd be kind of weird. We need a lot of non-natives involved in this program in order for it to kick off. There's just way too much work, way too much busyness. It just can't be all tribal members doing this. So the partnership had to be built before we could go in for the money. But as you read these grants, and if you read how this infrastructure money goes in, it wants to go into partnerships. It wants to be that it pours money into a tribal program, but then get this, trickles down to white folks. Believe it or not, it's set up like that. So it's a pretty sure bet in this county that it will trickle down, because there's just not enough of us to do that. And you have to show of work. So contracts are just federal contracts, sometimes they get a sloppy reputation for being you can get away with a lot, but that's not true. It's pretty strict,
especially not when it comes to
it's all eyes on you,
and results are end results. You can't really fake a restoration. It's either there, it's not.
Yeah, there's some things of deliverables that you just can't.
Yeah.
These contracts you get in, you have to work. If you don't work, you go to prison, because you frauded the government. So it gets really nitty gritty that tribes are real protective about getting into these agreements and frauding the government or having these things go on. So if you go into a meeting where you have a prescribed burning association, crew, you've got all these different, Butte County Fire, River Partners, I'll just throw out names, you know what I mean? All these agencies, right? They're kind of state. They have a 501c3, they're state this and they're state that, and they're state this and they're state that. And for them to be eligible for a drawdown on the federal program is kind of like wishful thinking, unless they know somebody who knows somebody in Congress or the Senate. So you really, you'd have to be earmarked into that. And so if you're a federal agency, you're the first in line, your uniforms match. You can go in that line and ask for the money. So when you do that, they also won't give it to you if you haven't made friends with all the white folks and haven't made all the agency handgrapes and agreements that you want. Have you made an ad hoc committee? Well, maybe you should. Maybe you should get into all these things. And then the thing is that if you look at these big programs that happen for especially restoration and especially for conservation, you have what they call like environmental review. You have MIPA and ZIPA and CEQA, and everybody starts cringing and going into convulsions and starts crying and doing all these things because this takes so long and it's such hard and it's so wide, and then, the consultation with tribes is almost like, oh my God, what if they don't like me? Oh my God, what if I say something and insult them, and the whole project gets bagged because I don't know how to act around Indians. All those things start happening, and this like fever of this financial windfall that happens in most communities. So it's really important to jump the gun. So I'm talking about making partnerships and shaking hands and having lunch, you know, doing some play dates with some folks and just, you know, let's do this. Let's make a community together. You know what I mean? I'm going to talk to you. We're going to have a meeting. If I don't get along with somebody, which rarely happens because people should know how to behave around me. No, no, people should know how to be respectful in a partnership by the time they get to this point. You're not going to get a lot of like socially inept people when you're working at this level. Everybody's really acclimated to sharing information, sharing projects, needing friends, needing funding. So one of those things is that if a tribe initiates it and you get involved with a tribe that's doing a huge restoration project and all this federal funding is coming down, guess what's really streamlined? CEQA and MIPA. Because that consultation has happened, you're putting the
already happened.
The horse before the cart, and it's a good thing.
Yeah. So this is where you can turn something that is a nightmare for people into actually making the whole project better.
So it's a 2-bit thing is my answer. Yes, communities need to reach out with tribes, but tribes also have to be really in the middle. You have to, it has to be a mutual work to draw down those funds and that partnership building. And so you're going to have resistant council folks and people in tribal leadership that don't understand this infrastructure. It takes them a while to get acclimated. And then you'll have that the same on the white folks side too, and politicians and everything and agencies. So it's about getting through that mud and trudging through it and still doing those deliverables, which is partnerships and agreements and ad hoc committees that specialize in salmon and trout and, you know, willow and, you know, meadow flowers, whatever, meadow foam. You know, we got the whole thing. So each program, like I'm working with California Open Lands, needs a different kind of thing. So this one needs a different thing, but all of these programs can be funded through the tribe under this infrastructure. If we have all this partner, I can bleed the money. You know, I can be like, oh, I don't have to do all the work. I can work with California Open Lands, which gives me access to all this tribal territory. Woo, woo, woo. So people don't realize that this is also really coyote to get in land back.
To actually get hands on it. Yeah. And you know, when it comes to land back, right? It's like a lot of people have this sort of colonial notion of land ownership, like, oh, you're gonna come and take over my house and my toothbrush and, you know, move back or whatever. But, you know, I mean, we have no problem with saying this is the city of Chico and we're under a city government. We have no problem saying we're in California and we're under a state government. It's like it should be second nature to say we are also in Mechuca territory and we are under the tribal government, and the tribal government has an authority and political control over what is done with the land
and the seeds,
right? And seeds, and they got the seeds to prove it. You know, so you know, political control of land is and access to land where people and you know, living tribal members can practice their culture on the land it's meant to be practiced on is incredibly important. And you know, I mean, we're happy to say that many agencies do understand this now. I mean, we've kind of trained them. We've kind of whipped them a shape. But and you know, now they're starting to write us into grants for their projects, so that, you know, especially for this revegetation, there's actually not many people who know how to replant stuff and do revegetation. You know, revegetate, and especially riparian restoration. Forest Service doesn't have any money for it. They don't have any specialists to really do it. Most of their scientists are observers, not actual like doers, right? And so this is a niche that we've found is actually really important, because not only when we have access to that land, is their access to the restoration project, the ability to touch land, but it's also every project becomes a living seed bank in which those seeds and that capital can grow. And this is how these efforts can then scale up, right? Because like, you know, like I have to say sometimes when people are like, well, can you clip my roses like that? And they're like, we don't do yard work, you know. This is about land back through stewardship and through using public lands and all of this this territory to rebuild an economy, right? A decolonized economy.
Great, thank you. I'll jump in with my question. And it's, yeah, perfect segue from what you were just mentioning, but a little more background on my job. So we work with the regional offices in CalTrout to write grant proposals. And a thing that we're doing differently is taking that step back to think about how can we project how much time might be needed to intentionally build these partnerships. I think these partnerships are huge into making sure that our projects last a long time and are beneficial for many people besides just the, maybe the usual players are bigger than just our organization. And the last time we had a conversation with you, Ali and Mel, Gaby had asked about the painting behind you, and you explained how that painting came to be and just the reasoning for it. And it was kind of, I'll let you talk about it, but that really stuck with me because what I got from it was that you took the time to envision this different future, this different land. And I think in a capitalist society, and we're talking about decolonizing economics, in a capitalist society, we work so much and there isn't as much time to think about how things can be done differently. And so your painting has like stuck with me so much. And so I'd love for you to share with the group about the painting and like any other things you wanted to share about it.
Yeah, so this is pretty big. Oh, this is a painting. So this is a watershed. So this happens to be Butte Creek right here, coming to be north up here, and this is going down to the south. And so if you notice in this painting, I took a topography, map. I took out all infrastructure. I took out all the houses. I took out all the roads. I took it out. And then I actually started fixing things. I started fixing the weir. I made a little weir. I gave a little, inlets for water and streams and watershed. I started imagining where the water would go, how it would, the behavior, and even the appropriate shelving of different types of trees, different shrubberies based on the aspect that's here. And so this just took a lot of time, but it was like you said, like that creative time, but that really juicy energy that your body creates when you're thinking of something outside of the box, but it's in the box, but it's new, but it's healing inside to paint it. And I think that I've been out on Butte Creek for 14 years on this one piece of land during a restoration projects are tough out here for natives because they usually give you rock quarries, old, just the junkiest stuff. And usually it's the hardest thing to restore because it's been so damaged. And so it made me think of the whole creek, not just one piece of it, but the whole thing. How do I fix the whole thing from stem to stern? Which we actually, we've made an initiative going after a grant for $25,000 to plan a program that does just that, from stem to stern, fixing this whole watershed. And just to let folks know, Butte Creek is your last wild salmon run in California. That's it. This is it. Out of all the thousands of creeks that we have in California, she's the last one. And that's why you have me thinking, how do I save the last creek, the salmon run? How do I do it in California? So precious. It is so freaking precious. So we have to work with all the agencies, the duck clubs, right? The homeowners associations too. We got to work with all of them. We got to make nice. Sometimes I have to send my other people in because I can't do it, but they do it. And it's okay. But we all get together, we all get along, and we learn. And so the important part is that we could take approach a programmatic EIR for all the teeny projects all the way up and down this creek and package them into one package, do one environmental, do with the tribe during the consultation the whole time. Not people do that, but it can be done. You should do it. And so
Worth a shot.
It's worth a shot. And what that also means is that workforce development, we have an understanding of the scope of work because we're writing the scope of work this time. It's not get her done John Deere, who's like, I got a Bobcat, Well, guess what? All federal watersheds, all watersheds in California, I'm thinking about all over the United States pretty much, they're federally regulated by the Army Corps of Engineers. The California Fish and Wildlife have a daddy and a boss. That's called Army Corps of Engineers. That's who they answer to for California waterways. And so it's not private property. So to have a federally recognized tribe work with a federal agency on watershed and do all this stuff, it's the best way of doing it, right? But yeah, you have to get the players involved. I have to work on my end to massage and work out my tribal politics so that everybody that I'm presenting to the public does nice. And then they do the same for me. But the thing is that this is access to gajillions amount of money from the state and from the feds to match up and get this job done. And so that's the painting, but I just went into a political spiel after that. But, and I'm sober as heck right now. I just had a tangent.
Well, beautiful, because I was going to ask a political question a little bit. So a lot of what you've talked about is the partnership between, at the federal level, tribal to federal agency. And I wonder if you've gone through the process with state agencies to acquire access on state or local lands, thinking like agencies that hold property, and then perhaps you've gone into relationship on co-management or stewardship. I have a second question about, I would love to hear more about how you do the prediction, because I feel like we're often reactive in the work that we do rather than predictive.
Yeah. Okay. So for the first question, state agencies, not so much directly. We have developed relationships with local agencies, local resource conservation districts, fire safe councils, Chico State, and various entities that either they have in the Verbena Fields, the city of Chico, that's local, and then we got ourselves we got TEK written into the vegetation management plan for the city of Chico. If people don't know, Bidwell Park is the 6th largest municipal park in the United States. So it's thousands of acres. The state is interesting because a lot of these projects, even the ones that are federally funded, are managed through state agencies like Cal OES, Office of Emergency Services, Cal Fire, and some of these agencies not only are they kind of used to the way things are, they kind of have an interest in keeping things the way that they are. So, we have to work really creatively around that. Like, for example, we had one agency that wanted to write us into a reforestation plan, except that CAL FIRE had very standards for reforestation that come out of the timber industry. So for example, they wanted a minimum of 125 trees per acre, which is still like hazard fuel levels, right? They had a species mix that was all timber conifers. There was only one oak species that didn't even belong there. It was like, there was no madrones, there was no hardwoods, there was no, not to mention drought tolerant species like oak. So we were like, okay, how do we work with this? This is the thing about scoping, right? When a lot of state agencies are kind of like, they have their fixed regulations. And so that doesn't always fit with what we see as the appropriate scope of work. So we've had to work around that. And usually local agencies, since they're the one that's managing the money on the ground, is, we're trying to work with the local agencies that are the decision makers to try to get more flexibility in that area. But the state has helped with more cultural burning, which is definitely the focus of policy making right now. But burning timber forests, prescribed burning timber forests is not really going to help in the future, it's a relationship between plants and a burning regime. So there is a lot more work to be done, especially on the state level when it comes to having tribes at the table in terms of scoping the work that needs to be done.
Yeah, and there's a lot of, a lot of state agencies, like CAL FIRE's primary purpose is fire suppression. So suppress, 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 suppress. And in some cases that makes sense, in some cases it doesn't. What I like to look at is the big picture. So if we look back on this painting, I'm going to show you something on a cliff. So I don't know if you realize, but this is a cliff right here coming off. So this is layers. So it's like a butte. But through this little areas right here is where there's a crease, almost like a crack that goes way up. We have all seen a crack, right? Goes all the way up like that. And there's a bunch of vegetation growing in that crack, right? But when you're a firefighter, you call that a chute, right? It's real dangerous. It's really dangerous to actually go in there. They're actually one of the most, famous ways that firefighters are killed are these kind of dangerous little zones here. But I'm going to tell you that all these chutes along Butte Canyon have a millionaire living in a house right above it because it's a great scene. Scenic view.
$1 million views.
$1 million view. Hotel California. Take you right off the map. So pretty, right? So that kind of state agency and state regulation, even though CAL FIRE is into suppression, they also don't regulate where people put houses. If they're into so much fire suppression and they have so much manpower that would actually kill a bunch of their men, they still don't regulate anybody's homeowner not to build there. So that's how states, to me, agencies work. They don't talk to each other enough at the Capitol to get the good jobs done. So that's why I'm trying to do it as a sovereign entity, like a state within the, within our tribal territory. Because I think, I guess in some ways we can do better than California. And we should be looking at that. Each tribal territory could be taking a piece of that, because states do not have the capacity to cover every inch of the state to do the management necessary. But that agency, there's a tribe everywhere you are,
Can you speak to the what's your process for the predictive?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So predictiveness. So I'll tell you guys something a little personal about me, right? My resting heartbeat around 44, 52. Okay. Real strong heartbeat. Athletic, strong, but slow. But I'm gonna tell you, when you have a slow heartbeat, you also get to actually have a better reaction time, right? Yeah. I'm actually I'm on a slower time, see things different than folks.
Real good in the crisis.
Yeah, real good in a crisis. My daughter has seizures quite often, so my body is getting used to not panicking in a crisis. So that's something personal about me. When I'm looking at, predictability of certain things, I'm looking at what we could do to make it a benefit. How do you make lemons out of lemonade, right? If you're going to have fire, how are you going to have fire, right? So I'm going to take an opportunity where someone's allowing us to have fire somewhere, good fire training on property. And then I'm going to say, okay, we're going to learn and watch, how does this fire behave? Let's watch the behavior of fire. Let's learn how good fire acts. Let's watch how it does. How does it select mortality? How does it select who gets to live? How is it doing this? How it's its nuances, right? So you get to study fire, how it behaves. Then you get to learn that on different scales, different ways, not from a perspective of suppression, but of, what are you doing so good? Why are you so pretty? I call it Indian TV. Just watch fire for days. So when, you have that, Indian TV going on, right? I watch you. Ooh, I see you flame. Ooh, you kind of get big. You ran out of fuel. Right? You're watching all the stuff going on these little fires that's going on. You don't want to learn how bad fire behaves, just like you don't want to. Who wants to know how a bad husband acts? Nobody, right? No, I don't want to know. So you don't want to know how bad fire is either, right? So you want to know what good fire is. So you want to know how a good husband behaves. That makes for a good life, right? Or a good wife. You know what I mean? Good life, good wife, good husband, whatever. It's all into everyone's relationship. I know that it's